Hello, everyone. I am Solomon Sonya, and I'm extremely blessed to be able to present once again with HackCon. So, without further ado, let's jump straight into our presentation. And again, welcome to our talk, the new malware evolution, known and not so known attacks. And this is between myself, Solomon Sonya, as well as Mr. Suhail Mushtaq. Thanks again for attending our talk. So, here are some things to expect. We'll do an introduction, we'll talk about the research motivation. We'll look into revolutions in malware and how that impacts us today. Then we'll come back to the malware evolution. We'll talk about this concept called the Byzantine approach and how we can utilize this to better secure our computer systems. Then we'll finish with recommendations and time. If there's time, we'll also entertain questions at the end. So a disclaimer real quick, the views presented in this talk, they're that of the speaker, they're that of myself. I'm Mr. Suhail, as well as the research that we've done in this research area. But they definitely do not represent the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force. Okay, so just a quick background. Who am I? As I said, Solomon Sonia, I'm the director of cyber operations training right now. Before taking on this position, I was the assistant professor of computer science at the United States Air Force Academy, as well as forensic studies. And in addition to that, I was a research director at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Then before those positions, I was the director of intrusion response at the Air Force Computer Emergency Response Team. And before going to that position, I was one of the senior enterprise network defense managers inside a security ops center, like one of your SOCs. And then that position, before that position, I learned software reverse engineering that I still do to this day, as well as software development. And then there's some education there at the bottom. All right, so let's talk about our research motivation. As I always say, and something we have to understand is that malware attacks, they continue to increase in sophistication and prevalence. As we look at this chart here from the epoch, the beginning of time, here just starts in 1999, and that's when we started looking at CVEs, your common vulnerability and exposures. Okay. I want to now talk about this concept called a revolution in military affairs. And we'll talk about this that leads us into understanding and analyzing revolutions in the development of malware. So, a revolution of military affairs, it's a fundamental change in character and the conduct of armed conflict, which led to an irrecoverable change in the conduct of warfare. Furthermore, those changes compel an accelerated adaptation in novel doctrines and strategy. So we'll also take this concept again to see, like, how does our life change from certain revolutions? And I'll give a few examples. One of them is gunpowder, the advent of gunpowder. And before, I had a weapon, I had a gun, not a gun, I would have like a sword, I would have a club or a rock, and I'll just try and pummel the enemy to death. With the advent of gunpowder, this now allowed us to being able to use guns and stronger weapons in enacting warfare. Now, with the guns, we now have the creation of the hot air balloon. Before, my view would just be if I can get the highest rock or on the highest mountain, be able to see further. But now the hot air balloon allowed us to rise higher on a platform to be able to see out for reconnaissance, surveillance, and you can also have a better vantage point of when the enemy is coming to attack you. Another revolution in military affairs, the advent of rifling as well as the rifle. But rifling allows you to be able to spiral a bullet really, really fast. And now, once it's projected out of the weapon using gunpowder, it can now go much further in a straight distance. Before rifling, if I would fire a projectile, it can go semi-straight, but it would veer off course. But this allowed us to spiral and to be able to better hit an adversary. But all weapons from the points that rifling was developed will utilize a form of rifling. Then we have the advent of the steam engine. The steam engine, the basic engine to allow us to propel and to move, has led to the birth of many incredible technologies and systems for us to utilize today, like the steam engine, like the car, or like any system, plane engines that allow us to be able to go much further, much faster, as well as carry heavy equipment. Then the advent of the airplane, revolution military affairs, because this changed our life ever since we learned how to become aloft under man-made power. Then the integrated circuit. So the integrated circuit, this allows us to do complex computing and to be able to store this information, send it, and now I can create more complex computing devices as the entire computer system because of the advent of that integrated circuit. Can you ever imagine life without the computer? We cannot do that because even your phones, everything we utilize today has some form of integrated circuits as well as computing that we learn from the creation of the IC and the computer. With the creation of the computer, we now spawn into the internet, allowing even me from the United States be able to speak. And this is going to be projected in Norway. It's incredible through use of the internet. It has changed our very way of life, as well as another technology to look at, as well as the satellites to be able to send technology into space, to send and to reflect signals back down to Earth. This allows us to have that global communications. And in particular with the satellites, we're also looking at GPS. GPS is also considered a revolution in military affairs because this allows us to be much more precise in anything that we're going to do. But in our life, the GPS, this allows you to be able to communicate and navigate from any known to unknown location using computing devices. On top of the GPS, you even have things like the timing signal that we actually rely on for encryption. Banking, secure communications relies on the signals that we receive from GPS. That's why it's one of the aspects that I'm considering as a revolution in military affairs. Now, how does that apply to malware? Well, if you look at malware from its creation many, many years ago to now, it went through distinct categories of where there are revolutions in its development. And those revolutions transfer to current day that we see every single new technology that was created a few years ago. And so we'll look at these revolutions in terms of critical vulnerabilities, Internet of Things, when did that become mainstream types of attack, ransomware, and how did that evolve, as well as cyber warfare. Okay, so now if we go back to our CVE, we can overlay this with a timeline to determine, hey, when did new revolutions occur in malware itself? If we look back to around 2000, 1999, 2000, we see that this was the birth of the botnet with multiple systems that are communicating to a single controller based on the spread and the propagation of malicious software. Then in 2005 and 2006, we see the dawn of the rootkit, the concept of being able to borrow malware, borrow malicious software into the computer system that the normal user is not able to see or to determine that it's there. We learned that concept actually from Sony's rootkit that was not called a rootkit at the time. But they try to embed software without, unbeknownst to the user and without the user's control, to better have management of copyrights. They did not want music to be spread illegally, but learning how they did that on the computer machine. All malware, your advanced malware, is going to implement the concept of the rootkits that again Sony brought for us. Then also in 2005, we see the Arceus, the Archivist malware. So what we learned from Archivist, ransomware had existed before, but this was the first time that ransomware utilized asymmetric encryption. And now ransomware moving forward is going to utilize whichever form of asymmetric encryption to further hold the machine and the data inside the machine hostage. Then in 2006, we see ZeusBot, very ubiquitous malware and malware that's going to exist out there. But this is now when malware is attacking banking information. And so now we're stealing information from the user and now utilizing that for additional financial gain. In 2007, we saw the monetization of exploitation toolkits. We create the exploits, and now we are selling this, or we're giving time for other individuals to utilize the toolkits that we have developed. Then in 2008, Configure worm. So the configure, until this point, whenever malware created itself or whenever malware infected machines, and especially if we wanted to establish the command and control, this was usually hard coded into the malware somewhere. So analyzing the malware, we can see, here are the different domains that it's going to try and reach out to. But all of that stopped in 2008, in which the configure was the first to introduce an algorithm to generate the domains for the command and control. One sample can generate 600,000 domains out there to obfuscate your analysis in your different blocks to try and protect against the malware, but only a few domains were actually in utilization for the malware authors to utilize that command and control. But we learned that from the configure worm. Moving forward to 2010. So 2010 was a critical time for malware, in which we saw how the Stuxnet, very well written malware with lots of 0 days built in, for this software to go from many different systems until it landed in Iran and compromised Iran's uranium nuclear enrichment facilities. Incredible malware. This is your true dawn of cyber warfare at the nation state level, or most like the nation state level. I don't know who created the Stuxnet worm or which groups of people might have created it. Okay, in 2013, two main things that we see here. One, the mainstream of ransomware. Ransomware, as I said, existed before, but now it's commonplace from 2013, with your CryptoLocker and your further types of malware from this point. But CryptoLocker, this was the first to spread via drive-by downloads and the first to introduce cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency, it's anonymous. We don't know who's putting in or who's subtracting from the cryptocurrency. Your CryptoLocker was the first to utilize this digital currency, and now your major ransomwares that are compromising machines are going to utilize some form of digital currency to try and anonymize where the true attackers are actually withdrawing their funds from. Additionally, in 2013, this was also the revolution of advanced persistent threats, in which Mandiants, the first time a civilian organization was able to attribute large, like nation state level attacks. And this one, APT1, was produced, it attributed China to many years of compromise and espionage, stemming back from 2006 to present in that single attack. That was an incredible revolution. And since that point, we have over 40 APTs now with different attacks that we can attribute to certain actors in the malware stream. Then in 2014, we have different types of attacks that were revolutions to us. One, they were always insiders, but Snowden was our biggest insider that now spawned the revolution of we need to look after insider types of attacks and insider threats. Snowden was our largest one who made this mainstream. And then as well in 2014, points of sale attacks. There were different companies who were attacked to include Target, Chase Bank in the US, as well as Home Depot. And these systems, these organizations were attacked from third party vulnerabilities and third party that now led to large stream attacks in the major companies, which costed hundreds of millions of dollars in damages and in repairs. And then mobile ransomware also became mainstream in 2014. Moving over to 2016, we see ransomware as a service with your Petya ransomware. And Petya was a very many of these are well written. Petya was extremely well written. That it was also your first to utilize your master boot record encryption. So it keeps the user from being able to even start their machine until that ransom is paid. Petya also was the dawn of ransomware distributed via cloud systems. A Dropbox was the first one used, and now many of our systems are going to be promulgated via cloud technology. Moving into 2017, two things happened here. You see that there's a distinct climb in the vulnerabilities that were reported. One, our vulnerability reporting management systems, they evolved. More individuals were able to identify vulnerabilities. But another one is in WannaCry. So WannaCry, this was a very well written ransomware that stemmed from knowledge with the Eternal Blue, most likely learned from exploits or the insider attack of Snowden a few years ago. This is now weaponized to go after many other vulnerable Windows 7 machines with the WannaCry. Then moving forward into 2019, you have more invisible malware that's now fileless, in which nothing is written to disk, making itself invisible from your antivirus software. Your SolarWinds of 2020, and then we'll look at 2021. Your supply chain interdiction in 2020 led to a massive exploitation and espionage of many systems that are still vulnerable to this day from SolarWinds. So SolarWinds had a system called Orion used to manage many systems inside a network. Orion was compromised with Sunburst backdoors and Sunburst malicious software that's now promulgated to many other systems and networks without them knowing that the legitimate company SolarWinds is distributing malware and backdoors into many known and well organizations to include universities, military, government systems, as well as medical systems. And your Colonial Pipeline, another major ransomware attack, but life changed from these types of ransomware, and we'll get into that in a couple of slides to go. And Log4j, I don't consider the Log4j shell it's not a revolution attack because it's more of the same. You see a way to compromise what a system is expecting, and then you can cause it to go somewhere else, bring in injected malware, and now you have a large scale attack. But this is significant because of how ubiquitous the logging in the Log4j was utilized in our today mainstream systems. Now, I said on the Colonial Pipeline and ransomware in 2021, we learned a lot. It changed our lives from how ransomware can have significant impacts to our day of life. Now, in response to the Colonial attack, the United States and the Department of Homeland Security, it established the ransomware task force, because the nation realized that, look, ransomware is not one-offs that individual companies have to respond to. Ransomware is it's a national threat that has to be responded and treated severely in order to ensure that life continues as normal. Now, the ransomware task force came up with four main recommendations, and one was to establish an international coalition to combat ransomware. Also, to disrupt ransomware's business and profit models, we have to figure out how to attack ransomware globally as an international task force to go after this and to help everybody at large. Another recommendation is to figure out ways to help organizations prepare and respond from ransomware attacks. And then this response, once ransomware attacks are known, how to respond to it more quickly and efficiently to protect the organization that is in fact impacted by this ransomware and to protect everyone else also involved. Okay. Then if we look from the Ransomware Task Force, this is a very good read. It was released in 2021. I took a few excerpts from there. That is eye-opening. One of them, ransomware in 2020, the known attack, so much more unknown exists than known, but from what we know about the ransomware around the world, victims paid over $350 million to ransomware individuals. So it's an asymmetric type of warfare between adversaries and normal, legitimate organizations. But people are paying lots of money for this because their information and their way of life is very important to them. The average amount paid in ransomware was over $300,000 for most of these companies. And then in this statistic, in 2020, a survey by Sophos, they surveyed 5,000 different organizations to see, hey, have you all been compromised by some form of ransomware attack? And out of those 5,000, only 5,000 selected, over 51% of them said yes, they have been compromised with malware. And at this chart above, we're seeing the average cost of each ransomware attack. In 2018, still starting, the average cost was around $5,000, just 5,000, until Fast forward into 2020, just 2 years from that, and the average cost of ransomwares, this is between 178,000 to 200,000. And now when you look at all these, it's stamped into over 300,000 per ransomware attack. So this is very, very costly. And that's why a national organization was established to try and look after malware. Now, one of our things that we have to see is in spite of the evolutions of malware, we still need to develop new ways to approach security. And one of those ways to approach security is what we are identified as the Byzantine generals problem. So the Byzantine generals problem is a classical hypothetical problem that you have a set of generals in different locations. The generals must come to a consensus of, do we attack, do we retreat, or do we surrender? All of them must come to the same attack in unison, and this is called a consensus. Anytime that one says, okay, yes, we're all going to attack, we're going to attack, well, me, I'm going to surrender and I'm also going to retreat. This is when a fault occurs, and any one of these faults can lead to an entire failure of the operation or for the country. Now, we can use this Byzantine fault tolerance into the assessment of our computer systems to determine that when any of these nodes, any nodes or any component in our systems, that they may fail at any time stochastically, we won't know if or when they fail. Additionally, we won't necessarily know if or when they may act maliciously, i.e. they've been compromised by another outside attacker. And so now, understanding that different components may fail at different times, our question is, how do we assure the system? How do we assure our critical components? So here, a very easy way of starting with your Byzantine approach, we can take just a computer system. Any system, we can draw a circle around it, and now we can analyze which systems and components exist on that computer system. And then we talk about, well, in each of the components, where can an attack occur? And if these types of attacks occur, what is the compromise in our operations integrity? Does our entire system fail, or can we recover from these? And if so, how would that work? So here we have different stacks of the computer machine. And just as we said, let's figure out when these failures can occur and how do we secure our systems. So now our attacks, when we talk about the evolution of attacks, they started from your system programs and your application programs. So users, what they are using, this is when the malware started to attack like different programs or to Trojanize, to attach malicious programs to normal programs that users are utilizing. Then malware evolved. Besides just attacking the computer applications, it borrowed its way in which you see components of hooking and code injection. So now I can compromise libraries and system calls to allow further types of rootkitting activity onto the operating machine. Then malware has evolved, including that ransomware, to compromise the entire operating system. And then we're getting at a lower level, a lower layer in the system to compromise the kernel or to override different bytes and the firmware to either allow unrestricted access to the machine or to destroy it or to hold it ransom with a ransomware, as well as malware inside that hardware abstraction layer. Until now, you see malware that's actually written into the hardware, your components, your motherboard, your processors. Buying it from illegitimate sources may already have ransomware or malware built in that we cannot even see. And so our question is, since we know that malware, malicious code can exist at different components, how do we still assure our critical components such that our information and our processes will still remain secure in light of a contested environment? And last but definitely not least, let's never forget that the user is part of the system. Whenever I am asked or looking into how would I exploit a company or a computer machine, I actually will not even look at, okay, let's look at the components, let's look at the systems first. But I'll first thing I'll try and attack is the user, because the user is the weakest component that can actually allow to carry my attacks into the network. And so I can continue to exploit from this standpoint. Okay. Then here, this is a summary of our Byzantine failure approach. We have to be willing to evaluate our security systems and look at our security stack using this type of Byzantine failure approach. Understand what components can be compromised, and if so, how do we still assure our critical system, and our critical information. This brings us into a concept of resiliency and adaptation in light of conflict into the computer machines. Another thing that we have to understand is the information, the Internet of Things, your IoT. So with IoT, as more systems become operational and come online and are now interconnected with each other, we have to understand that this now brings new additional platforms for cyber attack. We saw these in 2010 when we were talking about the Stuxnet worm, but also look at the new automation inside the cars, the technology, how the cars are interconnected with different systems and allows me to talk and communicate and even learn from each other. This includes driverless cars and sends information from one component to another. But something we do have to understand is this increase in technology increases the surface area for attack. When we look at your light bulbs, this is again part of our Internet of Things. Other components like light bulbs and house automation, your Amazon Echo, these things have all been proven to be compromised. Okay. And so if we know that these are compromised, again, how does this affect our security? And one of the companies, even Amazon, is currently working on a settlement of over a multi-million dollar compromise between Amazon as well as the Ring technology that people have hacked in for years and use these privacy against individuals. So other things to consider as our Internet of Things are traffic lights, our SCADA types of systems, even your garage door opener. It's nice having technology, but also understand this talk technology can be used against you, including known attacks against here, like different insulin pumps and medical devices that we are putting inside our bodies. Security loopholes have been found, and so these could lead to deadly impacts against individuals if we don't better secure our systems. The airplane, when the Boeing crash occurred a few years ago, when one crash occurred after the other, I immediately thought, was this a cyber attack? We will get into one of our recommendations later, but the code that we put in, we also have to understand that this can be compromised, part of that supply chain interdiction, like with SolarWinds. And so if this occurs, how do we better secure our information? Here I've included Chris Miller and Chris Volasak. A few years ago, between 2013, 2014, they demonstrated how you can use software to take control of cars and activate the brakes. You can cause the cars to turn wheels. Imagine if I want to go after an adversary as they're driving, I can accelerate them to 70, 80 miles per hour, and now I can turn the wheel to one way or the other. These types of attacks can cause harmful impacts on our day of life that we have to understand. How do we better secure our Internet of Things? New Internet capabilities also includes new Internet types of attacks. And here, the failure to protect our systems could be very costly, measured in billions per year, billions with a B. Okay, so now let's talk about recommendations for a more secure tomorrow. We've seen many attacks out there, but there are ways that we should better secure and assure our computer systems. One of them, it starts with this concept of zero trust. Zero trust, it's a newer concept. There are different definitions of zero trust. But here, when we talk about a zero trust, the first thing we need to do, okay, is always inventory all of our assets. Inventory your assets, catalog your systems, and then understand what are approved and unapproved software and devices, and also access mechanisms. When might the system that is approved on a network, what conditions exist for it to now communicate with the internet? Why should it communicate with the internet? And now, if we don't trust these systems, we should be able to assess and say, here are the conditions that you should be able to operate online and you should not. Continuing in our method of zero trust, we also must always continue with our endpoint protection. Each device on your network must have some sort of protection. And then always with this protection, you install antivirus, intrusion detection and prevention systems, firewalls, but you install these, you maintain these, you patch, and then you must ensure that there's a good update routine to ensure what we know today, tomorrow when new attacks occur, our systems are still assured to carry on the operations for the network. Then access control. So access control is a critical mechanism of our zero trust. Your access control is a form of bifurcation, isolation, and segregation of, of systems. So different components, your critical data and your devices, they must be segmented on your network such that your point of sale systems, your cache applications is not going to be on the same network as, say, your HVAC, that now a person can compromise another system, your HVAC, as part of the Internet of Things, but then they can steal your actual user information or your critical proprietary code or software that you're working on. You have to be able to isolate these and then validate how do they communicate on the network. So I was just describing the actual attacks that we spoke about with like your point of sale attacks and even your solar winds, sunburst types of attacks that have succeeded because of very poor network bifurcation and isolation. Then your zero trust, underline your access control. It also definitely includes your changing of default passwords, default credentials on every device that you see. If there's any way that there's a password or authentication that existed before, make sure you change these. This is one of the ways that lots of our Internet of Things attacks occurred and continue to occur now, because these ransomware and these botnets compromise like your IP cameras, the cameras and stoplights, because of default credentials, and now conscript these systems to use in different types of attacks, botnet attacks, cryptocurrency, crypto mining types of attacks because of faulty password and credentials. So we have to ensure that we find these passwords and we change them as appropriate. And then your zero trust, as we mentioned previously, it also talks about controlling your ingress and egress points. Control and validate when should information come into our network, when and how should information leave our network. And then we must still look at lateral movement, because this is still a blind spot in many organizations that, yes, we have our firewall, we protect what goes in and what comes out. But what about from system to system? This lateral movement is still things that we have to protect in order to better slow down and restrict in case times of like your ransomware attacks from stopping to compromise one machine and then worm its way to many other machines and even our network devices, so our systems are not held at risk or at compromise to other ransomware types of attackers. And then with zero trust, you must always operate at the least privilege possible. Even your users, even if you're the administrator on that machine, you must utilize a limited or restricted, a least privileged account to carry out whatever work that you're doing. And then you only go to root level or admin level whenever you know that you're installing something. Then immediately you jump back down to your user level again. At least these access mechanisms can prevent, it can at least slow down um, the results of large scale attacks if they're able to come into the system. Yep. And then mandate. At this point, every system that you log into, even from your email to your bank, on your own systems, mandate that there is multi-factor authentication. Your single factor is a username and password, but another factor is like, let me utilize an authenticator or a key fob that has unique tokens that are generated for me to better secure my system, also authenticate that it's me. So utilize these multi-factor authentication mechanisms, because if these were used, there are different attacks we did not talk about, but in 2015, there was a large Office of Personnel Management in the US, a very large attack that compromised millions of personal data records of individuals, almost any person who has ever worked with the US government and its allies, their information, as well as their connections and their friends and acquaintances, all that information was stolen in that OPM attack of 2015. But even if something as trivial as multi-factor authentication was utilized, then many of those attacks would not have succeeded. So that's why in your zero trust, must, as best as you can, utilize your multi-factor authentication and encryption. Encrypt your data at rest, encrypt your data in motion, and also understand what data at location means. Mr. Sahel and I, we did research on that before. We have additional tools to come out in the future that actually lets us know data should only be accessed based on the organization at certain locations. So how do you validate those access mechanisms? These are encryption means that we should look at to better secure our computer machines, as well as analytics. establish the analytics, know what should occur, what is normal and abnormal behavior, both on your users and your systems. An example of this type of analytics is if I'm validating, like whenever a user logs into a machine, if I see a successful login, and then in less than a second, I immediately see a PowerShell that is launched and many commands are being executed still within that second or 2 seconds after that, that's not normal user behavior. Now, some people may utilize PowerShell at large. I understand that, but in general, these are not normal behaviors. So that's why understanding the analytics of your users and your system can help you better baseline and then be able to detect whenever anomalies occur. And now monitor your network. Monitor your network, including your cloud systems that are away from you. Sometimes we see, well, we will protect, we'll look at the logs of our hard systems that are within our enterprise and organization. But what about the cloud? Your cloud is still hard systems that still need to be protected. Make sure you're monitoring your access and your protection mechanisms of these cloud machines as well, and your data, how it resides, how it's stored, how it is transmitted to and from these systems. Make sure you validate these in order to secure the success of our enterprise as a whole. And now, if your organization may not be able to establish its own SOC, because those are costly, but I mean, sometimes the cost of our information, it's worth it. But in case your organization can't, there are other protected and trusted security ops centers that you can outsource your management. At least you can bring in additional threat intelligence, additional analysis to better protect your systems. So in general, with our zero trust, it's hard to do this. But overall, we just want to raise the cost of the attack. We want to raise the ability of that attacker to succeed in our systems. We want to raise that cost such that we can better protect our systems and then hopefully eliminate your large scale threats and especially ransomware that we're seeing that's part of our mainstream today. And then again, as we're looking at our zero trust, we also say to redesign your security posture to not as yesteryear where we said, okay, I'm installing a new operating system. I've just bought a new appliance. It's never touched the internet yet. So therefore, it must be secure. There must not be any malware. There must not be any ransomware or any types of malicious software on these machines because it already came to me secured. That must not be the thought anymore. Because as we've seen with your types of SolarWinds attacks, your supply chain interdiction, these systems can come to you already compromised with malware. So now we are redesigning our view, not thinking that our systems are protected before they touch the internet, but instead we were redesigning our posture to that of mission assurance in an already contested environment. The system that you're using, the network that you're communicating across, consider that these are already compromised. And if so, how do we better secure our systems? And with this type of thought, we're asking ourselves the question, all right, if ransomware exists, log4j type of attacks are occurring, if there's a data theft, a data loss, or a data contamination, or a data non-availability, like a DOS attack, if these hit our networks, if these hit our systems, how do we first prevent that attack? How do we prevent these from occurring and succeeding in our enterprise? And now when prevention fails, how do we detect this? How do we detect? How do we respond? How do we recover from these different types of attacks? And also, how do we persist when these attacks are going on? How do we still carry out the main functions of our business to at least ensure that we're able to operate and then recover appropriately? Now, as we're looking at prevention, detection, response, and recovery, as well as our persistence, we should also look at, okay, if we know we need to do these, what is our response time to accomplish each of these actions? And then we ask ourselves, all right, with our response time, is this acceptable? Is this too slow? And then how do we make this better? Now, in this situation, let's say, okay, we have done everything we need to do for our organization. Well done. What about your dependencies? What happens if an attack occurs on that other third-party vendor that we need to come into our network? If they're compromised, what can we do to better secure our systems? Again, think of like your sunburst type of exploits from your SolarWinds, that this was the third party that was trusted, they were compromised, and now brought the compromise to many organizations around the world. Then also think about your communication devices. As we look at our phones, as we have different devices inside the organization and our applications, our vehicles that are now automated, your Amazon types of Echo and your Fitbits, did you ever consider that these systems are tracking you? And also, did you ever consider that these systems are spying on you? When you go into your very important business conversations and you're in your meetings, did you consider what if the adversary is eavesdropping on what we're saying and now they're stealing what we have? You should consider these. And now, knowing that these things can occur, what should we do to protect our systems? And then, what about the malicious insider? In case of the Snowden types of attacks, can you determine their footprint? What did they touch inside your network? And then what automation is in place that if I know individual XYZ, Edward Snowden, reality winner, both of these were NSA paid employees and contractors. So if we know that they are a malicious insider, or you have malicious insiders inside your network, what automation do you have in place to identify what other systems are at risk? What did they touch? What information might they know? And also, how do we mitigate the damage? What ways can we immediately say, okay, you have protect information, but what type of RSA, what type of keys can I now revoke to keep that person from being able to spread our critical information outside or now to hold that ransom against us? Now, our culture must also change inside the organization. As always, network with security professionals and news feeds to bring in fresh knowledge, fresh ideas. Whenever we see if something has occurred, we ask, all right, since we learned something, what can we implement here inside our networks? And then red team your systems. Red team your systems and your process, as well as your policies. Reveal your vulnerabilities. And I said, embrace them. Embrace your vulnerabilities. We will always, all of us, we will have vulnerabilities at some point, somewhere in our system. That's okay. Identify them and then remediate them best based on your findings. Find those vulnerabilities, embrace them, and then remediate them. Let's be secure better. And then ensure your posture is agile and also remains evolutionary. Ensure that you change, you evolve, you enhance your postures and what you learn. Do not implement security strategies that were first started or installed in your operations or your organization 10 or 15 years ago. Do not say that, well, that has been installed a long time ago. We're going to continue to use that because your attackers evolve. You too must evolve to better secure your systems. Okay. And then continue your user education campaign. Even if you do an annual campaign, a biannual campaign, make sure that your users know the threats that exist out there, and then enhance this. As I was saying, your security postures of 10, 15 years ago, do not use the same video of, hey, these are attacks, these are ransomware that was created 10 years ago, that was even on like a VHS. Do not use the old systems, enhance and evolve these things because the human mind, we are created to recognize patterns. However, if you show the same type of education videos year after year, people will see these patterns, but they will also remove their mindsets from them because they're old and outdated and not applicable. So make sure you enhance this annually so your users are involved in your culture. And then establish that culture, establish the means of awareness of the vulnerabilities, and then make a safe space that encourages that information share with each other, as well as how to improve information as a whole. And then education. Education is critical to this system of security and enhancing our security posture. So when we're mentioning education, make sure that this is part of that continuous process improvement cycle. With our education industries, and even our industries and operations, partner with other research experts, partner and collaborate with national cyber task forces and different national organizations like your Institute of Science and Technology, Department of Homeland Security, US Cybercom, your Defense Information Security Agency, DISA. There are many organizations in every country that we have. Let's partner, let's share, let's collaborate so we all can be better as a whole. And then in our education in academia, incorporate those lessons learned, like what we've learned from industry, incorporate those into academia. So now, in order to create better professionals graduating into the community at education, we practice the concepts of secure coding, different secure coding paradigms, and ensure any system that we build, that we create, it has the security that is built in from inception. When I talk of how do I create a system, security, how do I ensure the system remains secure? How do I build in those secure coding concepts at the time I'm creating the system? And not that we rely on the concept of bolted on after the system has been deployed. We want to make sure that this is as seamless, and security is always built in. It's easier to build something than to come in and patch it after the fact. And then the last one, as we do these software development technologies and new security strategies, also validate the code. So validate what I've coded today. When I come back tomorrow, validate that what I'm looking at is what I created before. When I put these into good repositories to give us some subversion and different code control mechanisms, again, whenever I put something and I download it, make sure that what I'm downloading from those repositories are what I put up there. Make sure it's valid. So this is how we will stop tomorrow supply chain attacks, and now we can reduce your large scale exploitation in areas like your solar winds types of attacks. This is how we will be better tomorrow. So that's all we have. If there's time for questions, we'll definitely take those. Again, I'm always honored to present at HackCon. I wish you all well, and also good luck. Tomorrow will be better. It will take your direct involvement. And thank you so much for your time.